Working throughout the night, investigators unearthed a plastic bin that contained Tricia Todd's dismembered body dissolving in acid.
Disturbing new details today about the murder of a Florida hospice nurse once married to a Seymour Johnson airman. The Martin County, Florida sheriff says Stephen Williams used a chainsaw to hide the evidence after murdering his wife, Tricia Todd.
April 27, 2016. When 30-year-old hospice nurse Tricia Todd didn't pick up her 2-year-old daughter Faith from the babysitter, her family knew something was terribly wrong. Her car was found with keys in the ignition, purse inside, but Tricia had vanished without a trace. The last person to see her alive, her ex-husband Stephen Williams, a decorated Air Force sergeant who seemed like the perfect gentleman, cooperative, concerned, even volunteered for a polygraph test. But as investigators dug deeper into Tricia's disappearance, they discovered something chilling. Someone had been planning this for months. Buying equipment, digging holes, preparing for something unthinkable. What happened to Tricia Todd in those final hours? And what dark secrets was someone hiding behind a mask of perfection? This is the story of a mother who thought she was safe, and the red flags that were hiding in plain sight the entire time. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in your life is the one everyone else trusts completely. Let's get right into it. In the small coastal town of Hobe Sound, Florida, Tricia Todd grew up as one of 8 children in a deeply religious family. With a population of just 1,300 residents, it was the kind of tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, and faith shaped daily life. Tricia's father, David Todd, raised his children with strong Christian values, and Tricia embraced that foundation wholeheartedly. From an early age, Tricia knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life: help people heal. Her dream was to become a nurse, a calling that perfectly matched her compassionate nature and servant's heart. But first, she chose to serve her country. After graduating from Hobe Sound Christian Academy, Tricia enlisted in the United States Air Force. She served in food services at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, where her infectious personality and genuine kindness made her instantly popular among her fellow airmen. Her friends described her as authentic, lively, and someone who was always willing to give of herself for others. It was during her military service that Tricia met Stephen Williams, a boy originally from West Palm Beach who had also joined the Air Force. Stephen was charming, funny, and had what friends called a big personality. He seemed like everything a young woman could want in a partner: responsible, dedicated to service, and completely smitten with Tricia. Their courtship felt like a fairy tale. Here were 2 young people serving their country, sharing the same values, building a future together. Stephen appeared to be the perfect gentleman, respectful, attentive, and deeply committed to Tricia. When they decided to marry in a small, private ceremony in North Carolina, their friends and family couldn't have been happier. Stephen's charm was so convincing that even Tricia's father, David Todd, was completely won over. He would later describe Stephen as appearing to be a perfect gentleman during their courtship and early marriage years. The military environment seemed to enhance Stephen's appeal. He was disciplined, honorable, a man who had sworn to protect and serve. But beneath that polished exterior, there were subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. The red flags were so carefully hidden behind military professionalism and practiced charm that no one, not Tricia's protective family, not her close friends, not even Tricia herself, recognized them for what they were. Stephen's big personality that had initially attracted people sometimes manifested as a need to be the center of attention. His charm could feel overwhelming, almost performative, as if he were constantly playing a role. When things didn't go his way, there were brief flashes of something darker, a tightness around his eyes, a coolness in his voice that disappeared so quickly you might think you'd imagined it. These moments were fleeting enough to dismiss, especially in the structured environment of military life, where discipline and control were valued traits. Stephen had learned to wear his mask perfectly, presenting himself as the ideal military husband, while carefully concealing the man he really was underneath. For Tricia, who had grown up in a loving, stable family, these subtle inconsistencies didn't register as warning signs. She was in love with a fellow service member who seemed to share her values and dreams for the future. She had no way of knowing she had just married a master manipulator. After their military service ended, Tricia and Steven settled into what appeared to be a normal married life. But behind closed doors, the man Tricia had married was revealing his true nature, and it was nothing like the perfect gentleman everyone believed him to be. The first cracks appeared through Steven's chronic infidelity. This wasn't the occasional mistake of a man struggling with commitment. This was a pattern of deliberate, repeated betrayal that would span their entire decade-plus marriage. Steven cheated brazenly and often, showing a complete disregard for his wedding vows and Tricia's feelings. When confronted about his affairs, Steven didn't show remorse or promise to change. Instead, he became manipulative, turning the situation around to make Tricia feel like she was the problem. He would gaslight her, making her question her own perceptions and feelings about his obvious betrayals. But the infidelity was just the beginning. As their marriage progressed, Steven's need for control became increasingly evident. He began employing psychological tactics designed to break down Tricia's sense of self and independence. He would criticize her appearance, her decisions, her relationships with friends and family. Slowly but systematically, he was isolating her and making her doubt her own worth. Tricia documented much of this abuse in her personal journal and blog, writing about her struggles with her failing marriage. These private writings revealed a woman trying to understand why the man she loved was treating her so cruelly, desperately hoping that her faith and commitment could somehow fix what was broken. Then Steven's behavior escalated to something truly horrifying. He began killing Tricia's pets. This wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated psychological warfare. Steven killed Tricia's beloved animals as a way to assert dominance and control over her. The message was clear. If he could destroy something she loved whenever he wanted, he held complete power over her world. The pet killings were a form of terrorism designed to keep Tricia living in fear of what he might do next. But perhaps the most shocking moment came when Tricia became pregnant. Instead of joy and celebration, Steven's reaction revealed the depths of his cruelty. In a moment that would forever define his character, Steven punched Tricia in the stomach while she was pregnant, hoping to cause a miscarriage. Think about the level of evil that requires. This wasn't a man who lost his temper. This was someone who wanted to kill his own unborn child by violently assaulting his pregnant wife. Steven saw Tricia's pregnancy not as a blessing, but as an inconvenience that he was willing to eliminate through violence. Despite this horrific abuse, Tricia's pregnancy survived, and she gave birth to their daughter, Faith. But the trauma of Steven's assault and his clear resentment of the pregnancy cast a shadow over what should have been the happiest time of their lives. Throughout all of this abuse, the cheating, the psychological manipulation, the pet killings, the assault during pregnancy, Steven maintained his public facade as the perfect military husband. Friends and family had no idea what Tricia was enduring behind closed doors. The red flags weren't subtle anymore. They were screaming warnings. A man who cheats repeatedly, kills animals for control, and punches his pregnant wife is capable of anything. But Tricia, like so many abuse victims, was trapped in a cycle of hope and fear, believing that the man she married was still in there somewhere. The question wasn't whether Steven was dangerous. It was what he might do next. In 2015, after more than a decade of abuse, Tricia Todd finally found the courage to leave. The divorce was finalized, and for the first time in years, she could breathe freely. She packed up her life and her 2-year-old daughter, Faith, leaving North Carolina behind and returning to the safety of her childhood home in Hobe Sound, Florida. Coming home felt like a rebirth. Tricia moved in with her brother Joshua in a house just 2 miles from the beach, the same coastline where she had grown up. where her faith had been nurtured, where she felt truly safe. The small town embraced her return, and Tricia began rebuilding her life from the ground up. She threw herself into her calling as a healer, working as a hospice nurse at Treasure Coast Hospice while studying to become a registered nurse. Her colleagues saw a woman who brought genuine compassion to her work, someone who understood suffering and could comfort others through their darkest moments. Tricia also made several medical mission trips to Haiti, living out her faith through service to those in desperate need. Most nights, after Faith was asleep, Tricia would take solitary walks on the beach. These late-night strolls became her sanctuary, a time to pray, reflect, and process everything she had endured. The rhythm of the waves and the vastness of the ocean reminded her of God's presence and gave her hope for the future she was building. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Tricia was documenting her new life in her journal and blog, writing about her love for faith, her excitement about nursing school, and her growing sense of independence. She was vibrant, hopeful, and finally free from the man who had terrorized her for over a decade. But there was one critical flaw in Tricia's newfound freedom. Stephen Williams was still very much a part of her life. Because they shared custody of Faith, Stephen had legal rights to visit his daughter. The divorce decree required Tricia to maintain contact with her abuser, to allow him into her world on a regular basis. Stephen would drive down from his Air Force base in North Carolina to spend time with Faith, and these visits brought him directly back into Tricia's orbit. Here's the red flag that everyone missed. Abusers don't just disappear when you divorce them. When children are involved, the legal system often forces victims to remain connected to their tormentors. Shared custody becomes a weapon that abusers can use to maintain control and access to their victims. Stephen was pleasant and cooperative during these visits, paying his child support and seeming to genuinely care about Faith. To outside observers, he appeared to be a responsible father, doing his best to maintain a relationship with his daughter despite the divorce. Even Tricia's family saw no immediate cause for concern. But distance doesn't equal safety when dealing with someone like Stephen Williams. The 700 miles between North Carolina and Florida created an illusion of protection that was fundamentally false. Stephen knew exactly where Tricia lived, knew her routines, knew when she would be vulnerable. More dangerously, the custody arrangement gave Stephen a legitimate reason to be in Hobe Sound whenever he wanted. He could show up at any time under the guise of visiting Faith, and no one would question his presence in town. Tricia believed that leaving Stephen and moving back home had solved her safety problem. She thought the worst was behind her, that she could finally live without fear. She was building a beautiful new life filled with purpose, faith, and hope for the future. What she didn't realize was that Stephen Williams was using those custody visits to study her new life, to learn her habits and vulnerabilities. While she was healing and growing stronger, he was planning something that would destroy everything she had worked so hard to rebuild. The illusion of safety would prove to be the most dangerous red flag of all. Stephen began his preparation by purchasing a chainsaw in North Carolina. Think about that for a moment. A man buying a chainsaw has no connection to his normal life or work. He didn't need it for yard work or home improvement projects. Stephen Williams bought that chainsaw for one purpose: to dismember his ex-wife's body. But the chainsaw was just the beginning. Stephen also acquired acid, the kind used to dissolve organic matter. He researched exactly what type and quantity he would need to destroy evidence. This wasn't impulsive violence. This was forensic planning by someone who understood he would need to make a body disappear completely. Most chilling of all, Stephen made trips to Hungryland Wildlife, an environmental area, a remote preserve along the border of Palm Beach and Martin counties. There, in the isolated wilderness, he dug a grave. He spent time selecting the perfect location, far from hiking trails and roads, where no one would accidentally discover what he planned to bury there. Stephen prepared a plastic tub that would serve as his victim's final resting place. He calculated the acid concentrations, tested the container's durability, and ensured everything was ready for the crime he was planning. Every detail was considered, every contingency planned for. The most terrifying aspect of Stephen's preparation was how normal he appeared during this time. He continued his duties as a staff sergeant in the Air Force, maintained relationships with colleagues, and appeared to be the same dependable service member everyone knew. He was living a double life, respected airman by day, methodical killer in preparation by night. Stephen also conducted research into how to evade detection. He studied investigation techniques, learned about forensic evidence, and even researched how to manipulate polygraph tests. When the time came, he would advise his girlfriend Laura Guzik to take a drug that could help her pass a lie detector test, showing just how thoroughly he had planned for the aftermath of his crime. During his regular custody visits to see Faith, Stephen was gathering intelligence. He studied Tricia's routines, learned her vulnerabilities, and identified the best opportunities to strike. These visits weren't about fatherhood, they were reconnaissance missions for murder. The red flags were everywhere, but they were hidden in plain sight. Who suspects that the devoted father visiting his daughter is simultaneously planning to kill her mother? Who imagines that the cooperative ex-husband is spending his free time digging graves and buying acid? In April 2016, Stephen requested leave from his base in North Carolina. He told his superiors he wanted to visit his daughter in Florida. A perfectly reasonable request from a father trying to maintain a relationship with his child. His commanding officers had no reason to deny the leave or question his motives. Stephen drove down to Florida, rented an Airbnb near Tricia's home, and prepared for what he knew would be his final custody visit. Everything was in place: the weapons, the disposal site, the cover story. All he needed now was the opportunity to lure Tricia to where he could kill her. April 26th, 2016 started like any other day for Tricia Todd. She went about her normal routine, unaware that her ex-husband had spent months planning this as the day she would die. Surveillance footage from a Publix grocery store captured Tricia that day, smiling, vibrant, completely unaware of the horror awaiting her. That evening, as Tricia was settling in for the night, her phone buzzed with a text message from Stephen. Faith was having trouble sleeping at the Airbnb where she was staying with her father, he claimed. Could Tricia come over to help calm their daughter down? It was the perfect lure. What mother wouldn't rush to comfort her distressed child? Stephen knew exactly which emotional button to push to get Tricia to come to him willingly, without suspicion, without telling anyone where she was going. Tricia texted back that she was on her way. She grabbed her keys and drove to Stephen's rental, believing she was simply helping with a fussy toddler. She had no idea she was walking directly into a trap that had been months in the making. When Tricia arrived at the Airbnb, Stephen was ready. What happened next revealed the calculated brutality of a man who had planned every horrific detail. Stephen attacked Tricia, wrapping his hands around her neck and strangling her until she lost consciousness. But this wasn't about killing her quickly. Stephen had a twisted agenda that required keeping her alive for his purposes. When Tricia regained consciousness, she found herself at the mercy of a man she no longer recognized. Stephen forced her to reveal her email passwords and social media login information. His plan was diabolical. He intended to use her accounts to send fake messages making it appear that she had spontaneously decided to go to Haiti on a mission trip. Stephen was creating a digital alibi that would explain Tricia's disappearance for weeks or even months. Her family and friends would think she was serving others in Haiti, buying Stephen precious time before anyone realized something was wrong. But when Tricia regained consciousness and realized what was happening, she screamed. The sound of her terror and desperation filled the small rental space, a mother's cry for help that would go unanswered. Stephen couldn't risk the noise drawing attention. He grabbed a club and began beating Tricia in the head with savage determination. Each blow was calculated to silence her cries while ensuring her death. He continued the assault until she stopped making any sound at all. Then Steven strangled Tricia Todd to death, watching the life drain from the eyes of the woman who had once loved him, who had borne his child, who had endured years of his abuse before finally finding the courage to leave. The most horrifying detail of all, Faith was sleeping in the next room throughout her mother's murder. Their innocent 2-year-old daughter was just feet away while Steven Williams systematically tortured and killed her mother. Faith slept peacefully, unaware that the sounds from the other room were her world being destroyed forever. Steven had used his own child as both bait and cover for murder. He had lured Tricia to the Airbnb under the pretense of caring for Faith, then killed her while their daughter slept nearby. The level of evil required to commit murder with your own child in the next room defies comprehension. When it was over, Tricia Todd lay dead in a rented room while her killer stood over her body, already planning the next phase of his carefully orchestrated crime. Steven Williams had spent months preparing for this moment, and now he had to execute the disposal plan he had so methodically arranged. The devil's lure had worked perfectly. Tricia's maternal instincts, her love for her daughter, had been weaponized against her by a man who understood exactly how to manipulate her biggest vulnerability. April 26, 2016 had started with hope and ended with horror, and Steven Williams was just getting started. April 27, 2016 began with a phone call that would shatter Steven Williams' carefully constructed plan. When Tricia failed to pick up Faith from the babysitter that morning and didn't show up for her shift at Treasure Coast Hospice, her brother Jonathan knew something was terribly wrong. By evening, when Tricia still hadn't surfaced, her worried family contacted the Martin County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. Deputies arrived at the home where Tricia had been living with her brother and found a scene that appeared completely normal. No signs of struggle, nothing ransacked or suspicious. But Tricia's car told a different story. It was parked across from her residence, not in its usual spot. Inside, police found her purse and keys sitting on the passenger seat, but her cell phone and wallet were missing. The car's gas tank was completely drained. When deputies asked who had last seen Tricia, the family immediately pointed them to Steven Williams. He was in town visiting Faith, and he would have been the last person with her before she disappeared. Steven's response to police contact was textbook manipulation. He was pleasant, cooperative, and seemed genuinely concerned about his ex-wife's disappearance. Here was a decorated Air Force sergeant with no criminal history, appearing every bit the worried father trying to help find his daughter's missing mother. Steven told investigators he had rented an Airbnb for his visit and explained the events of the previous evening. According to his story, Faith had gotten fussy around midnight, so he texted Tricia asking her to come help calm their daughter. Tricia came over, helped with Faith, and then left around 2 a.m. because her car was low on gas. Steven even had an explanation for why he was seen buying gas around 1 a.m. Tricia had asked him to get her some fuel because her tank was running low. Every detail seemed to check out. Every answer seemed reasonable. But investigators weren't satisfied with Steven's story. Something about the timeline felt off, and they decided to examine surveillance footage from businesses near Tricia's home. What they discovered began to unravel Steven's perfect crime. Security cameras had captured Tricia's car, leaving her residence at 1 a.m., a full hour earlier than Steven claimed she had left the Airbnb. If Steven was telling the truth about when she departed, how could her car be seen driving away an hour before she allegedly left his location? More damaging footage emerged, showing the car making a U-turn and returning, then leaving again. These movements didn't match Steven's story at all. Someone had been driving Tricia's car in patterns that made no sense if she was simply going home after helping with Faith. Then came the most incriminating evidence. Surveillance footage captured a figure walking along the road in the early morning hours, appearing to move from the direction of Tricia's residence towards Steven's location. The person's gait and build matched Steven's description. When investigators confronted Steven with this evidence, his cooperative demeanor began to crack. The cameras had caught him driving Tricia's car after she disappeared, then walking back on foot, a detail he had conveniently omitted from his original story. Steven's lies were multiplying. First, he claimed Tricia had simply left on her own. Then he admitted to driving her car, but said it was just to put gas in it. When pressed about the walking figure on surveillance, he struggled to explain why he would need to walk anywhere if everything had happened exactly as he described. Investigators noticed something else troubling. Steven had left town the morning after Tricia's disappearance, abandoning faith with the babysitter and driving back to North Carolina without knowing where his ex-wife was. What father leaves town without ensuring his child's mother is safe? The perfect gentleman facade was crumbling under the weight of electronic evidence. Every camera in the area seemed to have captured Steven's movements that night, creating a digital trail that contradicted his carefully rehearsed story. Detective after detective interviewed Steven, each one poking new holes in his narrative. His story kept changing, his explanations became more elaborate, and his cooperation started to seem less genuine and more desperate. The man who thought he had planned the perfect crime was discovering that in the modern world, cameras are everywhere, and lies leave digital fingerprints. Steven Williams' methodical planning hadn't accounted for the electronic eyes that had been watching his every move. With his alibi in shambles and surveillance footage contradicting his every claim, Steven Williams was backed into a corner. But investigators still didn't have enough evidence to charge him with murder. That's when they noticed a crucial detail Steven had revealed during his rambling explanations. He had left 2-year-old Faith alone in the Airbnb while driving around in Tricia's car. Steven Williams was arrested for child neglect, abandoning a toddler while disposing of her mother's body. It was a lesser charge, but it gave investigators the time they needed for one final interrogation. In the interview room, faced with mounting evidence and the reality of his situation, Steven Williams finally cracked. What emerged from his confession was so horrific that even seasoned investigators were left speechless. Steven admitted that killing Tricia hadn't been an accident or a moment of rage. It had been planned for months. He had purchased the chainsaw in North Carolina specifically to dismember her body. He had bought acid to dissolve her remains. He had already dug a grave in the remote Hungryland Wildlife Preserve, complete with a plastic tub ready to receive her corpse. The fake emergency text about Faith being sick was just the lure to get Tricia to come to him willingly. Steven had calculated exactly how to manipulate her maternal instincts to bring her into his trap. His confession revealed the full scope of his depravity. After strangling Tricia unconscious, he had forced her to reveal her email and social media passwords. His plan was to send fake messages from her accounts, making it appear she had spontaneously decided to go to Haiti on a mission trip. This digital deception would have bought him weeks or months before anyone realized she was truly missing. When Tricia regained consciousness and screamed, Steven beat her with a club until she was quiet, then strangled her to death. All while their 2-year-old daughter slept in the next room. But the horror didn't end with murder. Steven took Tricia's body to the pre-prepared site in Hungryland Preserve. There, using the chainsaw he had purchased months earlier, he dismembered her corpse. He removed her teeth and fingertips to prevent identification, then placed her remains in the plastic tub filled with acid that he had readied for this exact purpose. Steven Williams had planned and executed what he believed would be the perfect murder. Every detail had been considered, every contingency prepared for. He showed no remorse during his confession, even bragging to detectives about his methodical approach. Faced with overwhelming evidence of premeditation and the death penalty looming, Steven's defense team began negotiating a plea deal. The state had a difficult decision: pursue the death penalty and risk a lengthy trial, or guarantee a conviction with a significant prison sentence. Assistant State Attorney Tom Bacadal later called it a deal with the devil. Stephen would plead no contest to second-degree murder and child neglect in exchange for leading investigators to Tricia's remains and accepting a sentence of 35 years in prison. The deal was controversial from the moment it was announced. Many felt that a man who had planned such a brutal, calculated murder deserved the death penalty. But without Stephen's cooperation, Tricia's family might never know what happened to her or be able to lay her to rest. On May 25, 2016, Stephen led investigators to Hungry Land Preserve. When he told them they would need a hazmat team, Lieutenant Yesenia Carade's heart sank. They knew they were about to discover something truly horrific. At the remote location, investigators found the plastic tub exactly where Stephen said it would be. Inside was what remained of Tricia Todd after months in acid. A discovery so disturbing that it left seasoned law enforcement officers questioning whether they had made the right deal. Stephen Williams was sentenced to 35 years in prison on September 30th, 2016. He would likely die behind bars, never again free to terrorize another woman. But for many who followed the case, justice felt incomplete for a crime so calculated and brutal. The monster had confessed, but the controversy over his punishment would linger long after he disappeared into the prison system. Stephen Williams spent over a decade perfecting the art of deception, and his greatest achievement was convincing everyone, including Tricia's own father, that he was a perfect gentleman. Even after the horrific truth emerged, David Todd struggled to reconcile the man he thought he knew with the monster who had killed his daughter. This is perhaps the most chilling lesson from Tricia's story. The most dangerous predators aren't the obvious ones. They're the charming military sergeants, the devoted fathers, the cooperative ex-husbands who volunteer for polygraph tests. Stephen Williams understood that the best disguise for evil is a mask of respectability. For over 10 years, Stephen maintained this facade while systematically abusing Tricia. He cheated repeatedly, killed her pets to assert control, and even punched her in the stomach while pregnant. Yet, he managed to keep his public image intact. His military training gave him discipline and credibility, making it even harder for people to see through his deception. The red flags were there, but they were hidden behind closed doors. Tricia documented the abuse in her personal journal and blog, but like so many victims, she kept the worst details private. Society teaches women to protect their abusers' reputations, to handle family problems quietly, to try to fix broken men through love and patience. Even after their divorce, the system failed Tricia in fundamental ways. Shared custody laws meant she couldn't truly escape Stephen. He had legal rights to visit Faith, giving him continued access to Tricia's life and location. The very system designed to protect children's relationships with their parents became a weapon that Stephen could use to maintain control. The most dangerous moment for domestic violence victims is often after they leave. Stephen's months of planning began after Tricia divorced him and moved back to Florida. Her independence and new life represented the ultimate threat to his control, and he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Here's what we must learn from Tricia's tragedy. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, chronic infidelity, cruelty to animals, violence during pregnancy, believe them. Don't rationalize it away because they're charming in public or respected in their profession. Don't stay hoping they'll change because predators like Stephen don't change. They just get better at hiding. The warning signs of long-term predators include maintaining a perfect public image while being cruel in private, using children as weapons to maintain control, escalating behavior after losing control of their victim, and having a disturbing ability to plan and manipulate over extended periods. Stephen Williams wasn't a man who snapped in a moment of rage. He was a calculating predator who spent months planning the perfect murder, while everyone around him saw only a responsible father and decorated airman. His military training didn't make him honorable. It made him a more efficient killer. But Tricia's story isn't just about the evil that destroyed her. It's about the love that continues to protect her daughter. Faith, now 10 years old, was adopted by Tricia's brother, Jonathan, and his family. She's growing up surrounded by people who ensure she knows exactly who her mother was: authentic, compassionate, and willing to give of herself for others. "We love telling Faith about who her mom was," Jonathan Todd says. "The family has chosen to focus not on how Tricia died, but on how she lived, as a devoted mother, skilled nurse, and woman of faith who made the world better through her presence." Tricia's legacy lives on through the medical mission work she loved, through the patients she comforted in their final days, and most importantly, through Faith's bright future. The family that Stephen Williams tried to destroy has instead grown stronger, united by love and determination to honor Tricia's memory. The red flags were ignored for too long, and a beautiful woman paid the ultimate price. But her story continues to speak, warning others about the predators who hide behind masks of perfection, reminding us that evil often wears the most convincing disguises. Listen to Tricia's story. Learn from the signs everyone missed, and never forget that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one everyone else thinks is perfect.